Rosa Parks was 42 when she changed the world. I just want to point that out because lots of us think that it's too late to make a difference, too late to do whatever it is that we're going to do to make this a better place. But Rosa Parks was 42, and part of the reason she changed the world is because of who she was at that particular moment in time. If she had come to that juncture at some other point in her life, some earlier moment, she might not have had the same impact. She was married to a barber and was firmly ensconced in the community, and she had respectability and dignity. On some level, we've been sold a bill of goods about this, or at least some of us have. We've been led to believe that she was this soft, quiet woman who was just tired that day. In fact, Rosa Parks knew full well what she was doing, and she was doing it to a purpose, though there is no way she could have predicted the results. And that doesn't diminish her courage at all. In fact, knowing what she was up to made the act that much more courageous. She knew she could be killed for this, or worse. Rosa Parks had been involved with the Montgomery NAACP for years before that, and they had worked and mostly failed to defend the rights of black people in the courts. People were murdered and raped for trying to stand up for themselves, or just because they were black. And Mrs. Parks knew about this because she was on the team of people who were working for justice. This was 1955, so it was right after the Brown versus the Board of Education. Schools were being integrated in Montgomery, but the black students, of course, didn't have school buses to ride. Those black students had to ride the city bus and sit at the back of the bus. So those buses had two doors, one at the front and one at the back. If you were black and there were any white people on the bus, you had to board at the front of the bus, pay your fare, then get off of the bus and re-enter it at the back door to sit at the back of the bus. You weren't even allowed to walk past the white people. There were a lot of really silly customs regarding where you could sit on the bus and when, and it was mostly enforced at the whim of the bus driver. Rosa Parks wasn't the only person that fought these customs. There were at least 5 other women who had done the same thing by the time she did it. In fact, she herself had once paid her fare, then walked straight back to her seat and sat down. The bus driver told her she had to get off the bus and reboard at the back door, but when she did, he drove off and left her standing in the rain, even though she had paid to ride. So she had just come back from a workshop that she'd attended in Tennessee at a place called the Highlander Research and Education Center. It was a place that helped train people who wanted to work for labor rights and civil rights. And as I've mentioned, she was very smart and knew what was going on in the NAACP. She has repeatedly said that she wasn't old or tired and it wasn't her feet that were bothering her that day. She felt strongly that every time black people submitted to the oppression just got worse. It turns out that the bus driver that day was the same man that had driven off without her before. She didn't realize this at first, and I don't know if he realized it. So, the whites-only section of the bus had filled. Keep in mind that 75% of the bus-riding population of Montgomery was black. The back of the bus was full, and the middle of the bus, where Mrs. Parks was sitting quite legally, was full, and some white people were standing when the bus stopped and let some more white people on. I don't see it documented anywhere, but I figure that there had to be some black people already standing too. The bus driver at this point decided to move the sign for the black section of the bus back so the white people could sit down. Initially, none of the 3 people sitting with Mrs. Parks moved, but the bus driver said something to the effect of, "Don't make this hard on yourselves," and they all got up and moved. To allow her fellow passengers to move, Mrs. Parks had to stand, but then she sat herself down at the window and waited. The bus driver asked her if she was going to stand, and she said, "I don't think I should have to stand up." He said he was going to call the police and have her arrested. She said, "You may do that." And he did. And when they came to arrest her, she asked, "Why do you push us around?" The officer responded that he didn't know, but that the law's the law, and you're under arrest. Remember, the school segregation laws were undone in the Supreme Court. The NAACP had some success that way, and they were looking for a case to end segregation elsewhere, and this was, they thought, the perfect case. Mrs. Rosa Parks was just the person they wanted, and they felt like she would follow through and see this case to the end. That's not how it happened, but there was no way to foresee the events that unfolded. They bailed her out of jail and began working on the case. Meanwhile, the head of the NAACP and a college professor who belonged to a group called the Women's Political Council conceived of the idea of the bus boycott. They printed up flyers and got it announced in the paper, but mostly it spread through the churches. 75% of the bus-riding population was black, and no black person would ride a bus. At a church rally, they unanimously agreed that what they wanted was to be treated with courtesy, have some black bus drivers hired, and have the middle seats of the bus be handled on a first-come, first-served basis. They weren't even asking to do away with the whites-only seating. People walked to work, sometimes great distances, and always having to avoid the white parts of town. They carpooled, they took taxis, they risked violence and worse for refusing to ride the bus. But they did refuse. They refused for 381 days, more than a year. While that was happening, Rosa's case got bogged down in the state courts. Alabama clearly did not want this heard at the federal level. So what the NAACP did was file a civil suit on behalf of 5 other women who had been subjected to arrest for violating the segregation laws. The pressure on those women was so harsh that one pulled out of the suit, but the other 4 did not, and it made it to the Supreme Court, and segregation was repealed and the bus boycott ended. Rosa Parks was a hero, but she didn't make millions or live a comfortable life after that. She and her husband lost their jobs and had to move to Detroit. And at the end of her life, she was broke. But she did get to meet presidents. She saw her autobiography published, and she knew in her lifetime that she held a place in history. She remained dignified and humble and strong.